The unease began quietly, almost as if it wanted to slip past me unnoticed. At first it was small forgettable details that didn't seem important on their own. The late nights on the phone, the way conversations ended abruptly when I walked into the room, the faint shift in tone whenever I asked casual questions. It felt like something was happening around me, but no one wanted to say it out loud. I tried to convince myself I was reading too much into things, that the stress of my marriage was making me paranoid, but there's a heaviness in the gut that doesn't lie. The boy who once confided in me had started pulling back. He was guarded again, defensive when I asked harmless questions, and secretive in ways he hadn't been before. He would leave the house at odd hours with vague excuses that didn't quite add up. When I pressed gently, he'd brush me off, almost irritated that I dared to ask. It wasn't the behavior of someone simply craving independence. It carried the weight of guilt, of someone hiding something too significant to share. I tried to believe it was just him growing up, figuring things out, but deep down I knew there was more. It wasn't just him. Mark, too, had become even more detached. He was rarely home, and when he was, his presence felt like a shadow, cold, distant, and uninterested. The emotional absence that had frustrated me from the start was now coupled with physical absence. He had excuses for everything. Late meetings, urgent calls, work trips that didn't quite match his schedule. I asked fewer questions not because I trusted him but because I was afraid of the answers. That silence gave space for my imagination to spiral, and every small inconsistency began to feel like a clue to a much bigger betrayal. The moment of confirmation didn't arrive dramatically, but quietly, almost cruelly. One afternoon, I was putting away laundry when I noticed his phone left unattended on the bed. The screen lit up with a message that caught my eye. Not because of what it said, but because of the name attached. It wasn't from a colleague or friend, but from someone whose connection to us should have never been blurred in such a way. My hands shook as I read the words, short but loaded, carrying an intimacy that should have never existed. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't innocent. It was evidence, undeniable and damning, that the boundaries I thought were unbreakable had already been crossed. I froze in that moment, torn between disbelief and fury, unable to decide which emotion had more claim over me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the nights he had been gone, the guarded expressions, the sudden secrecy that had consumed our home. Every fragment of suspicion snapped into place like a puzzle finally revealing its picture. The betrayal wasn't just real. It was happening right under my roof, right in the space I had fought so hard to preserve as a family. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept moving through the motions of normalcy while inside. My world felt as though it had shattered. I couldn't confront anyone yet, not until I could steady myself. But each glance across the dinner table, each word exchanged, felt tainted by the truth I now carried. It was as though I had been living in a house filled with masks, each of them smiling, pretending, while behind them lay lies too sharp to ignore. And as much as I wanted to close my eyes and pretend I hadn't seen it, I knew there was no going back. I couldn't keep the secret buried for long. Holding it inside was suffocating, and every passing hour only fueled the storm inside me. My heart raced every time I looked at either of them, knowing what I knew, watching them pretend as if everything was normal. The silence was unbearable. Eventually, I reached the breaking point and I chose to confront him first. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calm, it was raw and uncontrollable. I cornered him, demanding answers, refusing to let him walk away with excuses. His face paled at the sound of my voice, and in his eyes, I saw guilt before he even spoke a word. At first, he tried denial, stumbling over half-formed sentences that made no sense. He called it a misunderstanding, accused me of misreading what I saw, tried to twist the narrative to make me question my own reality. But he wasn't convincing. His voice shook, his hands trembled, and eventually his lies collapsed under the weight of the truth. When I pressed harder, he admitted it, his words dripping with justification that made my blood boil. He claimed it wasn't planned, that it wasn't malicious, that feelings had developed and they couldn't help it. Hearing him rationalize what was nothing less than a betrayal felt like an insult on top of the wound. The air between us thickened with anger and grief. I asked him how he could do this after everything I had tried to give him, after the trust one had placed in him when no one else did. He didn't answer. He just lowered his head, shame written across his face, and that silence was louder than any confession. It told me everything I needed to know, that he had chosen desire over loyalty, that he valued temptation more than family. But the confrontation didn't end there. I turned my fury toward Mark. When I laid the evidence in front of him, I expected outrage, denial, maybe even an apology. What I got was defensiveness and anger turned back at me. He accused me of spying, of prying into matters that weren't my business. His attempt to deflect only confirmed his guilt. And when the pressure grew too heavy, he cracked. He admitted the affair in fragments, between bursts of anger and shame, trying to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. He said he felt neglected, that he had been misunderstood, that he never meant to hurt me. But each word felt hollow, each excuse nothing more than another betrayal stacked on the one I had already uncovered. The house erupted into chaos that night. Voices raised, accusations hurled. Tears shed until there were none left. The boy I had once tried to protect, and the man I had vowed to trust stood before me, both guilty of shattering everything I had built. I was torn between heartbreak and rage, but beneath it all was a clarity I couldn't ignore. The life I thought I had was a lie. There was no patching this, no salvaging trust that had been burned to ashes. I felt betrayed by both the man who promised me partnership and the boy I had once seen as my own. And that dual betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. When the shouting faded, the silence was worse. The walls of that house felt foreign, poisoned, as though every memory had been tainted by what I had learned. I couldn't look at them without feeling disgust and sorrow crashed together in waves that left me breathless. In that moment, I knew the life I had been clinging to no longer existed. What stood in its place was only wreckage, and the only choice I had left was to decide whether I would let it bury me or walk away before it consumed me completely.